I'm Steve Jennings, and I'm a watch and history collector. So I brought in a World War II watch today. I've heard that it was a watch that was used in Canadian military tanks, in armored personnel carriers and whatnot in World War II, but I have no verification of that. I really don't know a whole lot about this particular watch.
Mechanized tanks were first developed by the British and French during the First World War. Although they were a fearsome presence on the battlefield, early tanks moved at a walking pace and were unreliable. By the Second World War, improvements in armour, suspension and armaments made tanks a deadly and devastating force. Deployed in theatres of war from the deserts of Egypt to the tangled jungles of Burma and the frozen streets of Leningrad, tanks were a versatile weapon used by all the major combatants of both the Axis and Allied nations. Equipping the tanks with radio communications enabled coordination and tactical maneuvering to maximize their ferocious killing power.
Steve, you brought in a couple great items here. What are these and what significance are they?
I brought 3 watches with me. Well, these are World War II era pocket watches. They're all very similar with the exception of the one with the white dial.
These are actually general service timepieces, and that's an Army use watch, and it was used throughout 39 to 45. And these particular ones are great examples of that. Actually, one of these has got GSTP stamped on it, and the arrow indicating it. This is a British one. The interesting thing with the one that you brought in is that it is actually a C on it, which defines it as a Canadian-built one. This type of watch was used in actually a radio set. This type of radio was only used in military vehicles, so tanks, armored cars, scout cars. It was a fairly new technology, and Canada was at the forefront of creating this technology and producing it, and it was a vital part of the Army.
So in terms of a watch, I'm a little confused as to why the military would have been issuing pocket watches to soldiers and putting them in armored vehicles when everybody else at this point was wearing a wristwatch.
These type of pieces obviously provided a technology that was proven. It was exactly what they wanted. It's not too large, it's not too small, it's unobtrusive, and it would be sitting inside on the face of the radio unit as it sat in the vehicle. Those particular units would rely on those timepieces obviously to coordinate radio messages. They would be logging those radio messages as they communicated. The radio units obviously had some flexibility because they could talk 3 different ways,
right.
Long distance or short to vehicles as they moved across, or internally. The biggest intercom would be the fact that they would be able to communicate within the vehicle and to talk to each other, which they hadn't had that feature before. Time plays a critical part of any sort of military operation, particularly if you're starting your shelling operations or you're starting your movement. Where do you want those people to be, and coordinating the time with that. These particular timepieces were proven, and I think that's why that they had it from there.
So I have a pretty good idea about these watches here, which were kind of used by infantry, but this one that was used in the radio, who would have been using it, and why would he have needed to use a watch like that?
The difference between the watches obviously is quite stark. We've got black and luminescent, where this is white with black on it, not luminescent. As being part of the radio system, the inside of the military vehicle or the tanks or whatever they were using were white. So obviously it fits in, and part of the radio, they wanted to be able to look at it and see it and make it stand out, and that's why they've done it that way. Who would use this obviously would be the tank crews and military vehicle operators. The typical crewman would be stuck in his vehicle and basically moving across the countryside. They were tied to the vehicles. So this would be an integral part of the radio system, and it would be something that they would look at and work with and follow all day. In August of 1942, the Dieppe raid, where a large number of Canadian troops stormed the beaches at Dieppe in France, they were the first usage of that radio system, and their tanks were equipped with it, and the armored cars were equipped with it. They had sent armored cars to go on the beaches, and they communicated back and forth, even though a lot of the tanks were disabled. So there was still some communication with it. Being able to have that option that they hadn't had before was certainly changing. Once the largest scale invasion happened in June 6, 1944 with Dieppe, we see a big movement of vehicles and tanks and a number of ways to communicate within the various formations that were sent in. So again, tanks going across would be able to relay the information back to the troops coming behind, and it really revolutionized it. In a number of cases, they were actually using these radios, providing them to infantry so they could talk to the tanks as well, and they would be on carts and the infantry would pull them along with them so they have some way to communicate with the vehicles. So the big large formations of tanks would be able to do it, and they'd be able to start seeing that way. Once they got into places like Normandy and moved towards Holland and along the coast, these type of systems would be very useful to be able to relay with the information to each other and to follow from there. These are great examples of military timepieces. Where do you see the future of these great items?
Well, I use and wear my watches now, but I have a son that's in a master's program in history, and he has great interest in these as well. So over time, I'm assuming I will pass these along to him, along with the stories and the knowledge that I've gained on where they came from and what they were used for.
Well, thank you, Steve, for bringing such great items. And obviously, we just see timepieces that are just sitting here, but the whole backstory of what it was part of and component is a bigger part of it. And I think that's the great story that we could take from this.
And that's what I'm taking away from it. I really appreciate the information you were able to give me that I didn't know already, the backstory on some of these things. I mean, they've all got a story to tell, and now I know a little bit more about the story behind that one. That was kind of fun. It was good to get a little more detail on some of these pieces and some context on how they were used and the difference they made. Each one of them has a story to tell, right? It made a difference to someone at some point in time, and it's nice to know what that was.